So tonight we're going to start talking about evaluation. And so we're going to start with obviously the most basic level. So we're going to be talking about evaluation in terms of different levels. So, you know, you're going to be looking at some things, and if those look okay, then you'll move to the next level. And then if the funding is there, then you'll move to the next level. So we're going to be talking about evaluation in those levels. And this level of evaluation that we're going to be talking about tonight is really kind of the most basic level of evaluation. So anytime you're doing a project, this is kind of bare bones minimum that you should be doing. So we'll talk about process level evaluation. And so you obviously remember this from HED 720. So we went this way in terms of planning. So now in terms of evaluation, we're going back this way. Okay? Now, an artifact of the model and the way that it's always drawn is that implementation falls up under the administrative and policy assessment. Implementation is really the next step after you do the administrative and policy assessment. So then process evaluation really relates back to implementation and the administrative and policy assessment. Okay, so we're going to be looking at implementation of our intervention. So when we go to implement a program, are we implementing it as we should be? And so you'll hear people using, again, several different terms. One of being implementation documentation. So implementation documentation, you're tallying up the activities that you did. You're looking at what processes went into place to implement. So if we were talking about doing an implementation documentation with this class, we could, you know, I have PowerPoint slides for every week, so I could show, I have a syllabus that says here's the way that they were supposed to flow, here's PowerPoint presentations for the way that they're supposed to flow. I soon will have video that says, you know, every week this is what we did. You know, in terms of the processes, I have all of my PowerPoints on Google Drive, and that documents like when there are updates or changes or anything like that. So all of that is there. I can document, here's what I did. Okay? And even to a point, if we make changes to like our class meetings or anything like that, I can document that on a hard copy of the syllabus, and then I have that. So if anybody ever says, well, did you implement, what did you do? I've got all of that documentation right there. Okay? It sounds simple and easy enough, but people don't do it. They don't do it. They're like, you know, they like take it for granted, you know. Or they have all the documentation. So they have the PowerPoint slides, they have the sign-in sheets, they have, you know, whatever. But they don't realize that by keeping track of that, they're documenting their implementation. Okay? And so when I talk about bare bones, I mean, we're not talking about, you know, changes of knowledge, attitudes, beliefs, whether or not somebody liked anything. We're talking about, did you do what you were supposed to do? How do we know that you implemented your intervention? So another aspect of this is implementation assessment. So implementation assessment, now you're doing data collection around the implementation that allows you to make corrections in terms of your process theory. So in terms of your thinking, if we do this, this, and this, it'll lead to something else during the actual implementation. So in other words, now you're saying, hey, we were supposed to have 15 students here, we only have 10, we only have 5, whatever. What's going on? What can we do different with regards to that? Maybe we started out, we're doing an 8-week intervention. We've got, first couple of weeks, we've got 15 kids, and by the 3rd week, we're now down to like 10 kids, and by the 5th week, we're down to 5 kids. Documenting that to see, hey, maybe there's a problem, maybe we need to make some kind of course correction of what it is that we're doing. So maybe it's, thinking through transportation, looking at when sessions are being offered or where they're being offered, to see if, like if you're dealing with kids and youth, when can you get them in, when's the best time to get them in, or did something change? Like for example, you do something late in the summer and school starts, kids' schedules change quite a bit. And so now you've got to say, hey, wait a minute, what happened? What changed? Oh, school started. Maybe we need to do our sessions after school or on the weekends instead of doing them during the day on a weekday. Okay? But what you also should be asking is, for those 5 kids that showed up on a weekday during the day, what's going on with them and why aren't they in school like they should be, kind of thing. So thinking through all of that. We will talk about this this semester as being program or process monitoring. So we'll talk about this a little bit more, because that's part of what you want to do. If you're in the midst of implementation, something's not going right, you're not getting the number of people in, maybe you're not getting the sessions implemented as they're supposed to be, you need to be able to say, uh-oh, something's wrong, what's wrong, what can I do different, what do we need to change so that we get back on track to where we're supposed to be. Sometimes it's not your fault, okay? If we come in here and the classroom's all tore up, it's not my fault, but it affects implementation. People go, well, why didn't your class meet? Well, my class was tore up, like we couldn't meet, kind of thing. So, you've got to be always doing the evaluation. Yes, ma'am.
So if you're running like an 8-week program, like you mentioned, is it the timely data collection, would that be every week?
Mm-hmm.
So for example, let's say you're running a 6-month program. Would you still be wanting to do it every week, or would you be doing it like every month? Like would it adjust depending on how long the program is, or?
Every time you have a session, you want to be looking at it. So if it's a 6-month intervention and they meet every week for 6 months, then every week for 6 months you need to be looking at your implementation. And I mean, attendance is the easy part to look at, but you also want to be making sure, the intervention says we're going to have discussion, we're going to have these activities, those kinds of things. You need to be making sure all of that's being implemented. If you say you're going to have snacks, is that being done? All the things that you said you were going to do, you need to make sure that you're doing them. And that's where this comes in. So if you see, oh, well, we're not doing something that we should be doing, then it's revisiting that. Because remember, the name of the game nowadays is that you're doing these evidence-based interventions. And the assumption is that you're going to get the changes that you need to have, or you're supposed to have, because you implemented the intervention as it was supposed to be implemented. Okay? So you've got to go back and do this data collection and make changes as they need to be made. So implementation evaluation then becomes another slightly different term. So implementation evaluation, we also call process evaluation. So now we're looking at, are there things that are going wrong with the implementation? Here we're looking back kind of retrospectively and said, this is what we said we were going to do. Did we do what we said we were going to do? So you're looking back really specifically at your program plan, at your budget, at your grant, saying, we said we were going to meet these objectives, or we were going to implement things in this way. Did we actually do them? So if we were going to hire staff, did we actually hire staff that we need to hire? Okay, so just slightly different. This is more looking at the plan. This is looking more kind of ongoing monitoring, like it says here, or assessment, to see whether or not you're implementing and things are going as they should be going. Okay, so what we will talk about here is, you'll see these terms other places. The feds call it process monitoring. So they call this process monitoring, process evaluation. So we're going to talk about process monitoring and evaluation because, again, if you're getting money from the feds, either directly from the feds, or you're getting money through the state that comes from the feds, they're going to be using more of the process monitoring, process evaluation terminology. So process monitoring. So with process monitoring, it's that routine documentation. So you're not necessarily doing something new or something above and beyond. It's kind of like, what's the regular, what would be the normal kind of thing to do to document characteristics of the people served. So think about, you want to sometimes know how many was served, race, age, gender. Maybe you want to know economic status, education status. Depending upon what it is, you may want to know health status. Basically, who's walking through the door and receiving your services is what you need to be documenting. The services that were provided. So what did you do? Okay? Did you do class? Did you provide people with materials? What exactly did you provide? Okay? This could be as simple as, so in terms of like characteristics, maybe you have a sign-in sheet, maybe you already have applications from people, so it's not every week you're capturing all this characteristic data, but if you know who's coming and you have applications, then you know who's been receiving your services. Unless, of course, you know, somebody that pulls the undergraduate move and signs in for somebody else. So, you know, that does happen. You guys know this. Services that were provided, again, documenting what is it that you did. Did you give out brochures? Did you implement a session? Which session did you implement? Even going back and looking at, here's the key things that were supposed to happen during this session, and here's what we actually did. Maybe you didn't do something because the fire alarm went off, and so you didn't have time. You had to leave and then come back. You know, documenting all of that so you know exactly what was done. And then the resources that were used. So for example, if you gave out handouts, you know, how many handouts did you give out, or how many did you get back? If you normally make 25 copies and you got back, you know, 5, then that means obviously you used 20 copies of everything. This is where some of the budgetary stuff comes in. How much did you spend on snacks? Or how much did you spend on copying? All of that stuff. It's documenting everything that went into implementing that intervention, implementing that program, serving that particular population. Does that make sense? Okay. So, we're answering then what questions were delivered, what population was serviced, and what resources were used. Okay? Should make sense. I mean, think about it. If you had to, you know, report to your boss, what did you do? Obviously, they want to, these are some of the things. If you're implementing an intervention, these are some of the things they want to know. What did you actually do? What was the need? If you're replying to a funder, they're going to want to know the same thing. What did you actually do? How many people did you reach? You know, they may go, well, you know, you're where you should be, or, you know, what did you do to correct things, what have you? Didn't you notice that you had a problem, and did you correct things? But that routine documentation, just knowing here's what's going on. And I think the issue becomes in evaluation is people get lazy and they don't do it. Okay? Or they say, I got it in my head. I remember. Okay? Like I'm standing here going, you know what, like I'm talking about how do we know I implemented this class? Well, I mean, like I said, I have the PowerPoints and things like that, but what I don't have is a sign-in sheet. You know, my personal bias, I don't like taking attendance, especially with graduate students. You're graduate students. You come or you don't. If you don't, then, you know, you don't have anything really to complain about. But that also means I don't, like I remember, like, I'm supposed to have 5 tonight and not 6, or I have 6 students, you know, but I don't document anywhere, you know, like on my PowerPoint, oh, there were 5 students tonight as opposed to 6. Or, you know, that Jake was absent. I don't document that. So really, if I were doing some kind of process monitoring, I would need to document that so that I would know. And then of course, if, you know, we needed demographics to go with it, then I could go look in you all's files and pull the demographic information and report that. So, you know, writing it down, capturing it, whether it's capturing it with actual writing or in a computer, you know, like logging in, here's, you know, so that you can keep track of it. Or, you know, even simple things like taking a picture. If I just stood here and took a picture of the class, then obviously I would know who was here and who wasn't here. Okay? Again, not my style. So, you know, but if I had to be more formal about it, I would, you know, this would be something I would have to kick in. And if, for example, there's now 2 students in class as opposed to 6 students, I would have to step back and say, what's going on? You know, is there something, you know, maybe there's a huge event on campus, or, you know, like tonight is the State of the Union address, you know, which thankfully I'm like glad we're here in class and not at home having to flip through all the channels and see that. So, yeah, so that's where we're going. So it's looking at what did we do? What did we do? How did we do it? Okay, so that's process monitoring. Think of as like kind of like bare bones, you know, if you don't do anything else. So if people say, well, did you evaluate? You know, chances are they're thinking about changes in knowledge, attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. You can always say, yes, I did evaluation because I did process monitoring. Just as an FYI, if that ever comes up in your program. So, process evaluation kicks it up another level. So, and going back to HED 720, remember we talked about a chocolate chip cookie? Okay, you remember that? Talking about a chocolate chip cookie as the intervention, and you can make changes to the intervention, you know, make changes to the chocolate chip cookie, it's still a chocolate chip cookie. Okay, so process monitoring documents what we put in the chocolate chip cookie. Okay? Process monitoring documents how many cookies we made. Okay? Now, when you get to process evaluation, you have to document what was provided. So, yeah, we call it a chocolate chip cookie, but was it actually a chocolate chip cookie? Remember, we had discussions about if you put a white chocolate chip in the cookie dough instead of a milk chocolate or semi-sweet, is it still a chocolate chip cookie? And some people said, yeah. Some people said, well, I don't know. We did all agree that if we put a peanut butter chip in instead of a chocolate chip, now it's not a chocolate chip cookie. Okay? So this is where we're going with process evaluation. What was actually provided? Okay? And how well was it provided? So we're now looking at our chocolate chip cookies and going, well, you know, they were a little soggy, or maybe they were, you know, a little soft, a little doughy, maybe they were crispy, burnt, and black like this lectern here, you know, kind of, you know, what was the quality of the cookie? Did people think it tasted good or not? So we're looking now at all of these things, and we're trying to assess, in terms of making behavior change, how the changes were produced rather than what changes were produced. Okay? So if we think, for example, that giving people a chocolate chip cookie will make them smile, a smile being the behavior change, then we look at maybe how did we give the people the cookie? Okay? So if I was going to do chocolate chip cookies, to make you all happy in class, should I give it to you at the beginning of class and give you one? Or is it that I'm giving you unlimited cookies during class? Or am I giving you cookies at the end? Kind of, how was that change produced? Okay? So if it's the intervention, it's like, how was that behavior change produced? Well, I implemented the intervention as it was supposed to be implemented. So I'm documenting how we implemented that intervention. Not just saying, here's how many sessions we did, and here's how many people attended, here's who attended, here's the resources that we did, but now looking at, we did the sessions, here's how many sessions we did, here's how many discussions we had, here's how many, all these little bits and pieces, okay? So that's where we're going with process evaluation. So, process evaluation is going to define the structure, process, and content to be delivered. Okay, so it's going to be looking at the recipe. What is it that we're doing? What is it that our intervention says step by step we're supposed to do? Tricky here. I'm trying to use this. And of course it
Try the
does.
slide on the side. It's not the.
No. It did something, but it didn't do.
Gotta be one of them.
Right.
It's usually the slide. I just don't know why it's attached to your volume.
Who knows? That's why I never use those. Okay? It documents the delivery of each of the procedures. So, for example, if you're doing something around weight loss and you're teaching people how to cook food effectively, it's, so that it's low fat, then you're documenting all of that. And how did you go about teaching people to do that kind of thing, the low fat cooking? You also might do observational assessments and analyses of your program sessions. So this is where, somebody's going to come in, for example, and do an observation of this class and say, yes, she did it. Yes, she didn't just turn the lights off and everybody went to sleep, but she actually lectured. These were her points that she tried to make. She covered her points, those kinds of things. Observing what's going on, okay? I like people. I don't trust people. Okay, so when you got staff who are doing stuff, sometimes you got to go out there and say, are they really doing it? You got to go out there and watch them and make sure they're doing what they're supposed to do. Make sure they're not turning the lights off. Make sure they're not going, I don't feel like doing this part, so we're not going to do this, and we're going to be done. I want to get home to watch the State of the Union. We're going to get done tonight, or I want to get home and watch this football game. We're going to get done tonight, by such and such a time. Making sure that people do that. Sometimes even with the best intentions, people cut corners because they want the easy way out. That doesn't mean that they're bad people. It just means sometimes the incentive isn't there to do what they're supposed to do. So if they know that potentially you'll drop in on them, then they're more likely to do something. Okay? Monitoring program staff and effort or activity. Okay, so even little things like, you know, hey, let me follow as a boss, let me follow you around for your day. What is your day all about? You know, we're in the process now, faculty are all doing their annual reports, documenting years, everything that I've done this past calendar year. For the record, no, I have not started mine yet, so don't even ask. I got as far as printing out what was already in the system. And it's due tomorrow. Yes.
Thanks for reminding me.
Okay. But, I mean, just going, that routine documentation of here's what we've done in terms of teaching, research, and service. You know, you can kind of look across people and see who's doing what and who's not doing what, and you can look at, you know, staff activities, staff effort. Are they doing what they said they're supposed to do? Are they doing what they need to be doing? You know, as faculty, we get evaluated on teaching, research, and service. So, you know, they want to see some kind of activity in all of those. So are we doing that kind of thing? Or, you know, in terms of looking at other staff around interventions, you know, if they say that they spend a day doing documentation, are they doing, you know, you can say you're doing a day of documentation, but I ain't seen a document yet, which means you're not doing the documentation that you need to be doing. So as with process monitoring, process evaluation asks these questions. Okay, so you're answering the questions of, was the intervention implemented as it was intended? Okay, did you do what you said you were going to do? You said you were going to do 8 sessions, here's what you said you were going to do in each session, did you actually do that? Then the other piece is, did the intervention reach the intended audience? So you said you were going to implement this intervention with pink people with purple polka dots. Okay, did you actually implement it with pink people with purple polka dots? Or was it green people with yellow stripes? Okay, because if it was green people with yellow stripes and you intended pink people with purple polka dots, then you didn't implement it with who you intended to implement. Okay, and then, you know, so if you think about it, if you didn't do what you were supposed to do and you didn't implement with who you were going to implement, now you've got an issue of what did you really do, and can you say that potentially any changes in knowledge, attitudes, beliefs, behaviors, health status, so on and so forth are related to your program? Okay, and I can tell you with evidence-based interventions, the information will be no. Okay, I can even tell you from a federal perspective that if you didn't do what you said you were going to do, or what the intervention said you were going to do, should do, then you run the risk of losing your funding. Okay? So again, did we do what we said we were going to do? So, as I've talked about before, I ran a teen pregnancy prevention project here in the city. We used the evidence-based intervention called BART, Becoming a Responsible Teen. We were not the only agency out of like 70-some, 100-some agencies across the country that got funded to implement BART. Okay? BART is intended to be an 8-week session, 8-week intervention with a session, an hour and a half to 2 hours every week. Okay? Those are the rules. And then they have, here's what you're supposed to do. I know of a site who did not implement it like that. They said, hey, all of our kids are out on spring break or they're out on Christmas break. We'll just implement the sessions, whether it's like spring break, over a week. Or we'll implement, yes, or we will implement our sessions over Christmas break. So we'll do, 3 days each week for however many hours, and we'll get all the sessions in. And we won't do certain things, we'll do other things. Okay? And I know the feds came down on them hard to the point of threatening to pull their funding because they were like, you cannot do it like that. That's not what the intervention said. We did actually get approval because, so the key with the intervention is that they give you a week in between each session so that the kids have time to go home and try whatever skill it is or information that you're teaching them that time. And they did give us approval to do like twice a week, like say on Mondays and Wednesdays or Mondays and Thursdays or Monday and Friday, as long as they weren't like Monday and Tuesday. Okay, because you have to have that time, that break in between so that they can go and practice the session. So we were able to get approval for that. But again, that had to come from the feds and the keeper of the intervention and so on and so forth. That wasn't something that we can randomly do. Again, I can't say it enough. When you're doing these evidence-based interventions, it becomes very important that you document and do what it is that you said you were going to do. If you are not able to do whatever it is that you said you were going to do, then you need to be able to document why you said you weren't able to do what you said you were going to do. So, I've also been on a project where, yes.
These evidence-based interventions, they typically come with like an evaluation toolkit where it's like sort of streamlined where you can answer those questions.
Some of them do. They'll come with like these checklists, fidelity, like for BART they call it a fidelity monitoring checklist. So it documents like for each session, like each instructor would have to fill out, did we do each of the activities and so on and so forth. Did you hand out this? Did you do that? Blah 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 blah. Not every intervention comes with that, so you've got to be aware of. But if you're getting funding from the feds, oftentimes they will tell you, give you, point you in the direction of the things that you need in order to be able to do that. If you're kind of, going through foundational funding, they may not. There'll be this expectation, but they may not give you a whole bunch of detail. Like one of your classmates is like, no, they don't. I think Brenda, you've seen where they,
They do everything, but the ones that we use were created by the curriculum. So like the actual curriculum, they might have that.
Right. And now, and in this day and age, since this level of evaluation is so important, they're starting to come with these things because again, they're not always funding an organization to even look at changes in knowledge, attitudes, beliefs, behaviors. Because they're like, their thing is, if you follow the recipe, if you make the chocolate chip cookie like it says, then you'll come up with a chocolate chip cookie. And so if you implement the intervention as you're supposed to implement it, then you'll get these changes in knowledge, attitudes, beliefs, behaviors. It's kind of the thought process. So, as a cost-saving measure, they do that. So, so those are kind of the basic levels, and so we're going to talk about a few things related to those as we go through. Quality. Quality is one of those things people want to know, was it good? Was it a quality program? All those kinds of things. And so here's a definition of quality that I would like to kind of push you all to use, and not get caught up in, somebody's opinion of how good or how well something was done. So here, quality is looking at the level of appropriateness of your professional procedures. So what it is that how you're actually implementing your intervention, and replicable things that you're doing, as well as participant assessment and intervention methods for a particular health problem. So looking at the appropriateness of what it is that you're doing, okay? Not necessarily, oh, they did a great job, they did well, they did, a lot of that's really subjective in somebody's opinion, okay? What you really want to be looking at is, was it appropriate? So for example, if they were looking at this class, they could say, if we got into, how well or how good, that might be dependent upon, in some cases, whether or not people like me. In some cases, whether or not people like, my teaching style and things like that. But if we were going to be talking about appropriateness in terms of replicable professional procedures, I'm using a PowerPoint presentation. We're discussing them. We will do group activities this semester. You can ask questions. They will generally be answered, those kinds of things. So it's, in terms of those things, in terms of quality, it's, a quality level of class. If, on the other hand, you want to focus on, well, she should have said this or she should have said that, or, that's a matter of opinion. And I think sometimes we get caught up when we're thinking about quality. We think about quality from our own perspective. Like, this is what we would like, and so that's what makes it good. And not considering, for me, what I would like is not necessarily what you all would like. And really, you all are the important pieces because you're the ones that are learning. So, quality on some level could be defined from your perspective, but if you're doing everything you're supposed to be doing, then in terms of like a professional standard, so I'm standing here, I'm lecturing, I have a PowerPoint, and I give you time to write stuff down, you may not like what I say, and that's fine. Think about undergraduate classes that you had to take that you were like, why am I sitting in this class? Okay, or even graduate level classes where you're like, why am I sitting in this class? It's not a bad class because you didn't want to sit in the class. It might be a bad class because they stood there. I think, as I told you all, I had the undergraduate calculus professor who stood like this the whole time and lectured like this and never looked at the class. Okay, that, yes. Yes, he would stand there and he would write and then he would talk to the board like this. I mean, like this was like over 30 years ago, and I still remember this man, and I still remember like then like how do you ask a question as a student in calculus? You know, if if the professor never turns around, how do you ask a question? And so like people used to wad up paper and bam, hit them in the back in order to get, you know, like at that point you could say, you know what? That's not appropriate professional procedure, okay? That's just not appropriate. So, you know, sometimes I think, you know, again, people get too caught up in themselves and like, oh, I don't like this, so that's wrong. Not necessarily that that's wrong, if it's appropriate in what they're doing, okay? If it's, you know, you may not like what they said, it still doesn't mean it's not good quality, it's just presented in a way you don't like. So think about quality from, you know, like more of an appropriateness of the procedures of what it is that you're doing, and not from, oh, well, this is what I like, and this is what people like me would like, so that's what makes it good quality. Okay? Fidelity. We talked about fidelity in program planning as it relates to interventions. And you have to come back full circle now because fidelity is important in terms of the intervention. So, you know, again, fidelity is implementing the intervention basically as it was supposed to be implemented. So you have your core elements, you have your things that are required, you've got protocols, you've got procedures, you've got content that all went into making this intervention effective, okay? That's why we have effective interventions. So effective interventions, like our chocolate chip cookie says, you do these things, okay? So fidelity is really important. Again, going back and thinking about if we want to say our program worked and we had changes in behavior, knowledge, attitudes, beliefs, so on and so forth, that are similar to what they expected or what they found when they actually implemented the intervention, then you've got to have fidelity. Okay? If you don't have fidelity, then you don't know what caused the changes. Okay? And so we'll talk a little bit about kind of what goes into that. So intervention fidelity, again, is that degree to which the program is offered as it's designed. Okay, so that degree to which we make that chocolate chip cookie as the recipe said. Okay, so there's 3 threats to validity. There's 3 things that cause you not to have fidelity. I said validity. I meant there's 3 threats to fidelity. And so these are the 3 threats. So, 3 things that cause you not to have fidelity. Obviously, the first one is that no program is provided. So, you said you were going to make a chocolate chip cookie and you didn't make the chocolate chip cookie. You said you were going to offer this class and the class never met. Okay? You have no program. You have a different program provided. Okay? So, now we have the chocolate chip cookie, but instead of chocolate chips, we put peanut butter chips in there. We got something different going on here. Or in terms of this class, we may meet sometimes, I may give you PowerPoint presentations sometimes. I don't know, maybe we go to a lecture, or we go, somewhere and have happy hour and cocktails and hors d'oeuvres and stuff like that, and we talk then. So it's like we're having class, but we're kind of not really having class. And we're paying attention, but we're not really paying attention. It's kind of like, it's something different all the time. Inconsistent program providing. So this might be where we have class some weeks, we skip a few weeks. I'll look at the syllabus and go, oh, let's meet, this week, and let's talk about measurement issues. So we skipped quite a bit of the program. Now we are like, oh yes, we're doing measurement issues. Oh yes, now we'll talk about evaluation planning, in a few more weeks. So it's kind of that inconsistent, hit or miss kind of program. All of which are things that happen when you're implementing interventions and implementing programs in the community. So here's kind of, when we look at program failure and theories around program failure, here's what we see. So you have an intervention, you set it into motion, so you start to implement it, you have the causal processes going, and it leads to the desired effect, okay? In that case, you have a successful program, okay? Because you did what you were supposed to do, it made the changes that you wanted, it led to the desired changes, so you got a successful program. Here, you have program interventions that did not cause these causal processes, okay? Which still led to the desired effect, okay? So, I don't know, maybe here you didn't implement the program like you said you were going to, or you didn't implement any program. But something happened, so maybe there was change in legislation or something like that that impacted your program, which led to the desired effect. Now you've got a process theory failure. So you thought if you implemented these processes and you followed them, that it would cause the changes, but your processes didn't lead to the causal changes that you wanted, but you still got changes, so it wasn't your process. It wasn't what you did with the intervention. Here, you have the intervention, you set it into motion, it causes processes to start making change, but it doesn't lead to the desired effect. Okay? So here, you thought, oh, we'll have changes in knowledge, we'll have changes in attitudes, we'll have changes in beliefs, so on and so forth. So now you've got an effect theory failure. Okay? So you thought if you did these things, it would lead to the desired effect, and it didn't. Okay? Here, your process for creating the change did not make the necessarily changes which led to your change, and so but you got changes anyway, so it was an issue with your process. Does that make sense? So if you saw that on an exam or had to explain it, you could explain it? Everybody's like, well, no, I didn't say that, Dr. TR. I mean, some of this is just stuff you have to kind of sit and go, Okay? So if you think about your logic model, okay, as a theory, Okay, so we theorize that if we do these things, it'll cause these changes, which will give us this desired effect. Okay? So if we do these things, it'll cause these changes, which will give us the desired effect. That gives you a successful program. We did this intervention, but it didn't cause the changes that we wanted it to, but we still ended up with a desired effect. Okay? That means there was something in here about what we thought our program would cause that would make the desired changes. So that's how you get the process theory. Okay? Here, we implemented the intervention. It started making some changes, but it didn't have the desired effect. So maybe we didn't see the levels of change in knowledge, attitudes, beliefs, behaviors that we thought we were going to see. So now it's an effect theory. So on some level, things worked, but it didn't lead us to the desired, which means something back here, particularly with the causal changes, we might need to go back and look at.
That third one though, always happens in programs, because nothing's 100%, right? In a sense.
We'll see, okay, so that's where it becomes an art and a science. Okay, that's why, number one, I never say make this 100%, because there's always going to be something that doesn't lead to the desired effect. Now, what you'll see with interventions is they'll say 25% of participants, engaged, or, either who were sexually active became abstinent. Okay, so if you now have changed this to 30%, there's a good possibility you're not. And the reason is this effect theory. Like that's not what it was designed to do. Okay? And so then that's on some level, like while you're looking at your objectives going, maybe I shouldn't have, they said in the ideal situation, 25%. We know we're not in the ideal situation. We're making some changes. Maybe we should back that down to 15% or 20%. So that's where the art balances the science out in terms of figuring out what this desired effect is. Yes, ma'am.
Could that be related to like whatever behavior change theory you're utilizing? Or, like when we talk about abstinence-only programs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, we know that you do them and the desired effect is usually not what you want it to be. Could that be related to the theory that you're utilizing?
Because think about, you have to define what's the desired effect. And what I'm saying for you all is you need to set the desired effect based on what the research from the literature about the intervention has shown. Okay, so if you go to an intervention, it has the research article and it'll say, 25% of the participants who were abstinent remain abstinent, for example. Okay, so if that's what they found, why would you think you would find something more implementing the intervention? So you should find similar, maybe a little bit less, because maybe now you're instead of, for example, instead of doing it in a community setting, you're now doing it in a faith-based setting. Just something that's slightly different enough that you might say, you know what? Maybe instead of 25%, we should do 20%. So now you've got this desired effect, so hopefully you'll end up with this.
So we're looking at evidence-based interventions, so
You should look at the
Never-
research.
True. But if we're gonna alter the desired effect, it should be a lower number typically?
Typically, yeah, I would say that would be your best, again, because part of the game, part of, the way that the world works is you want to be successful. Okay, so being successful means that you reach your goals and your objectives. You don't want to set it so low though that, you know, like if it's 25%, you don't want to set it at 5%, but you may want to back it down a few percent if, especially if you're doing something that's completely different from what the, you know, the original intervention was. Or even think about, you know, this is the first time you're implementing the intervention. And so now you've got to say, you know what? I'm not sure how this is going to work. You know, like you say, you know, it's like when you invite people to a party and you're like, I didn't ask for RSVPs, but I'm hoping people will show up, you know? It's kind of the same thing. Like you're kind of like, okay, you know, like, I think this, you know, this is the first time we're doing it. I think it's going to work. We're trained, blah, 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 blah. But, you know, life happens. Something always happens. And you can't do it the way you're supposed to. So, or, you know, something happens that interferes with how you're supposed to implement. So then you've got to think about, again, you want to be successful. You know, a few percentages based from what the research found is acceptable. Or what the, you know, intervention says, you know, hey, you know, we might not make this. Or, and then think about it this way. You could say it says 25% of the participants will do something. Maybe the first year you do, because you're new to the intervention, you maybe say 15%, because you're not sure about retention and things like that. Will you have the same people from session to session? You know, like we had the experience of training community people who weren't, you know, who aren't professionals. They don't have MPHs, you know, some of them have other jobs. So you have that concern about not being able to implement the intervention as it's supposed to be. So then you may say, okay, we'll go 15% the first year, we'll go 20% the next year, maybe we can go 25 that third year. So, you know, you can show that you're making progress to where you need to be. But have some reasons, here's why we're at 15% this year, 20% the next year, and now up to 25%. And it's perfectly fine to say, you know, you're learning the intervention. You know, those things are to be expected. Remember, you know, like the first time you drove, you know, you weren't 100%. Yeah, you passed your driving test, but, you know, there were probably things we all could have done better, even if it was nothing more than just driving a little bit faster. You know, now we get in our cars, one hand, you know, there's no hands on the 10 and the 2, you know, or the 9 and the 3. We're just one hand on the wheel at the 12 or the 1, just, you know, driving. Some of us are on our phones like this, you know, I mean, like we don't take it for granted anymore. So, you know, early on you say, yes, I might get a speeding ticket. Now you're like, I probably won't get a ticket. Or maybe now you will get the speeding ticket before you might have gotten an accident. So, you know, it's understanding what's that desired effect and agreeing on it. Amanda, back to your point about, you know, like abstinence and things like that. I think people come into sometimes these situations not understanding, you know, so they think, oh, we're going to do abstinence education. Now, everybody's going to be abstinent. Doesn't work like that.
Or like DARE or something.
Right. I mean, any of these ones, you know, the rah, feel-good interventions that we did early on that we're finding now don't work, you know. So, I mean, yeah, you could implement DARE, abstinence education, cause it the desired effect, it fails, you know, and you could say, yes, we had a successful program, okay? But the reality is the people who like those programs think they're like the greatest thing since sliced bread, and they work, and refuse to listen to the evidence. And it's like, okay. I mean, I've had one kid go through DARE, and I was like, okay, we're gonna sit here and, you know, the public health professional's not gonna stand up in the middle of DARE graduation and go, but this sucks. You don't understand. Like, this doesn't work. Like, some of these kids, I can tell you right now, they're gonna be using drugs. And look, you know, like, and then you wanna just like walk up and look at the kids and go, you and you and you, I know you guys are gonna be using drugs. You know. I mean, it's there, okay? Or like abstinence, you know, especially when you're teaching high school kids abstinence. And it's like, you do understand like 25 to 33% of all kids are sexually active or have had sex at least once. Okay, so it's kind of like, you know, missing the whole point. Again, you guys get this right. So understanding, defining key point that Prescott pointed out is, and Amanda, you too, defining what is that desired effect, okay? And making that desired effect realistic based on the intervention, the program, not on the Yahoo feel-good stuff of, oh, we want 100% people to be abstinent. So, just saying. Okay, another thing. Satisfaction. Whew. Okay. Satisfaction is going to be one of those things that is hard to measure and hard to define. Okay? So my recommendation is always going to be, if somebody wants to look at satisfaction, try to convince them to look at something else. So, satisfaction should be considered part of the process evaluation and not part of the outcome, or not the outcome. Okay? So, in other words, at the end of the day, it's not that we want people satisfied, okay? Because if we wanted people satisfied, we wouldn't be sitting here. You guys would be much more happy and much more satisfied if you were sitting at home in your couch, on your couch or in your bed, instead of sitting in this class, okay? So don't think of satisfaction as being part of the outcome, but as part of that process evaluation around, did you do what you said you were going to do? So part of that then reflects back on, how do you define satisfaction and from whose perspective, or what should that look like? Okay, so to really get at satisfaction, you need to be looking at the service utilization plan, your implementation plan, your program plan. Look at what the service was that somebody received, okay? What is it that they expected, okay? Most often, when what they receive is less than what they expected, somebody is dissatisfied. When what they received is more than what they expected, then they're like ecstatic. They're very satisfied. They love the place, okay? And then also factoring into that is how one is treated, okay? So if someone's treated very poorly, then they're more likely not to be satisfied. If somebody is treated greatly, then they'll be satisfied with the service. So think about, you know, services that you've received and that you've been satisfied with or not satisfied with. So, I mean, I can tell you, I just recently wrote a complaint to Southwest Airlines a few weeks ago. Okay, and I mean, okay, so I'm flying with, it's me, my daughter, and my mom, who's 81 years old. And, oh, she's probably gonna be mad that I told her age, but whatever. Okay, and so we were flying from Orlando to Las Vegas. My mom's in a wheelchair, okay, just because she can't walk the distances in the airports, things like that. So, kind of to back up, we flew Southwest Airlines, me, my mom, and my son, my youngest son, flew Southwest, the weekend of December 9th, we flew, to LA. My mom had a wheelchair, Las Vegas to LAX and then back, so we flew Friday and came back Sunday. Mom had a wheelchair. When it's time for pre-boards with wheelchairs, a ramp agent has, or somebody who's, pusher has to take the wheelchair down. But me and my son both board the aircraft with my mom, get her settled and everything like that. Okay, mind you, December 9th, we flew LAX, Southwest, etc. So we get to January 5th, coming back from Orlando. My son is actually on the same flight with us, but he's on a different itinerary, so, but me, my mom, my daughter on the same itinerary. Now mind you, I now have to like before, they would call somebody and airport pusher would come and push my mom at LAX. Coming back from Orlando, I did the pushing, okay? And it was crack of dawn in the morning. We are on a 6 o'clock flight, so it's like 3 o'clock, it feels like 3 o'clock in the morning for us, tired, whatever. So now I have to push my mom through Orlando's airport, not quite sure, where I'm going. Some airports, they've got elevators, so you've got to find the elevator. So I'm kind of like a little irritated that I'm having to do all of this first thing in the morning. They call for pre-boards, and the guy, the three of us go up, push my mom up, and they're like, okay, well, we'll have to do that. I'm like, okay, whatever. And then the guy who's working the gate says, oh, well, only one of you can go down. I gave him that, what you talking about, Willis? Look, And he's like, oh no, only one of you can go down. I said, what are you talking? I'm like, he's like, either you can go down or your daughter can go down. I'm like, my daughter's 13. Okay, like I'm gonna leave her out here to go through the boarding process. Like 13-year-olds can't, are considered unaccompanied minors. So anyway, I was like, I told my daughter, I said, you can go down. She was like, no, I want to stay with you. So anyways, my mom ends up getting on the aircraft first. We're, of course, in C group. So we're, some of the last ones to get on. My mom gets on the plane, and she holds 2 seats for us. So what I didn't know is as we're getting, the boarding process is going on and other people are getting on the plane, they're looking at her like, can I get those seats? And she's like, no, I'm holding them for, my daughter and my granddaughter. And they're like, no, we need those seats, blah, 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 blah. So people are harassing her, waiting for us to get on the plane. So anyway, we get, but again, it's 2 different things. I had an expectation based on a realistic expectation. Like this wasn't something like I cooked up, I mean, this was, and we flew to Orlando on Delta. All 3 of us were able to get on the plane at the same time with her in a wheelchair. So I said, I'm like, angry by the time it's 6 something in the morning. I'm supposed to be sleeping. I can't sleep. I'm like, I am complaining to Southwest about this. So I did. I sent them an email with, the things. I explained that this is what had happened. And I said, I'm going to have to rethink flying, like, with 3 generations. Like, I'm not saying I won't fly Southwest again, okay? But if I'm gonna be flying with my daughter and my mother, and my daughter is 13 years old, I'm not sure I wanna fly Southwest again if that's what I'm gonna end up dealing with. So, they got the email, sent me a response, said we have to investigate, we'll get back to you, okay? And I'll admit, I was tired, so I told the homeboy, I was like, look, I don't feel like talking to you right now. I said, because I ain't had no sleep. I said, and I'll end up in jail. Because I'll say something. I mean, seriously, when you're just you're mad, it's early in the morning, you say something, somebody, you dealing with the airline, you say something, somebody gets offended to, boom, now all of a sudden you're in jail. Sorry, I got other things to do. So I was like, I don't even feel like talking to you about it, whatever. He's like, well, you can talk to the supervisor. I was like, that ain't gonna help matters. You've already made it clear you're not gonna let us on the plane. So anyway, wrote the complaint. They replied, said, oh, we'll investigate and everything. And sure enough, they did. So I got an email late last week. So this was, we flew January 5th. So maybe I sent the email on the complaint on Sunday or Monday. And they did reply to the email, but here's the thing. They explained that it's federal rules. When you have a disabled person, that only one additional member in the family is allowed to go down with them. Okay? So you talk about what was received and what was expected. And they were like, we understand, blah, 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 blah. They did actually talk to the gate agent and everything. And, was like, they couldn't wouldn't be the issue wasn't discussed further. Which was probably a good thing because, he could have said what I said. But then my daughter said, again, I'm half asleep. So my daughter said, when I said something about, I'm not going to talk to you about this right now because I'll end up in jail. He said, well, if you want to end up in jail, I'll just put you at the end of the bottom of the list kind of thing. So good thing all of that stuff didn't come out. But suffice it to say, they explained, here's, what the federal rules are. So, okay, you get it, so-and-so's enforcing the federal rules. But I think, particularly in flying, what people are seeing is that you do one thing at one airport, you do another thing at another airport. Same airline, same thing with TSA checkpoint, your bag gets, my bag gets pulled one time because I got snacks and stuff in it. Okay, fine. I come back, now my bag is being pulled, not because of the snacks that are still in my bag, but because of the change that never changed in my wallet. So as we're thinking about satisfaction, we've got to understand what was received, what was expected, and to a point, how people were treated, okay? Because sometimes, it's all in how people are treated. People are looking at surgeons, for example, and well, how much bedside manner does a surgeon have to have? Well, surgeon has to have a little bit more than, say, the anesthesiologist. Because anesthesiologists, when you go in for surgery, they just come in, hey, how you doing? Let me just check your name. Are you allergic to anything? And keep it moving. What medications are you on? Have you ever had a reaction to anesthesia? They keep it moving. Okay? Whereas the surgeon has to come in before surgery, they talk to your family after surgery, they, in theory, talk to you before surgery when you're planning out to do all of this. So they've got to have a little bit more of that bedside manner and how they treat people. So understanding how people are treated, you can have, maybe you don't get the service that you need. How can you get mad at the lady at the TSA checkpoint who pulls my bag for snacks and goes, oh, I didn't know we were bringing snacks today. Maybe I should come with you. She's being friendly about it. She knows it's annoying and things like that. Whereas the ones who pull it because of change are they just kind of look at you and I'm like, I don't know what am I supposed to do? Put my change in my suitcase and check that? But if I'm not checking bags and what how do you not have change if you're paying with cash? I'm like, that whole process just confuses me. So, that whole how one is treated kind of thing, when you are treated poorly, you're going to be more likely to say that something was not as good. So, some challenges then in measuring satisfaction. Okay, so you may end up with what we call a ceiling effect. So with a ceiling effect, you have a high mean and a small standard deviation. So there's very little room for deviation, for wiggle room, for improvement. Okay? Is what we're talking about with the ceiling effect. So we even see this with course evaluations. If the top score is a 5 and somebody's scoring a 4.58, 4.78, whatever it is, there's not a lot of wiggle room for improvement. Okay? So you're not going to improve on satisfaction. It's not, yes, mathematically, can it get better? But at some point, what's the difference between a 4.58 and a 4.78? Not a lot, not compared to a 1 versus a 5 kind of thing, or a 2.5 versus a 5. So understanding that sometimes you reach that ceiling effect where everybody's, pretty happy with whatever's going on. So another aspect of measuring satisfaction is that it's got to be culturally sensitive. Okay, so some populations, for example, expect to be looked in the eye, shake hands when they meet or greet somebody. Others, that's a form of disrespect, so they may look at the ground and they may not want to touch you and shake your hand. So you have to understand that and saying, were you greeted appropriately? Okay? Even, some people, what was my mom just telling me? African American male, probably late 70s, early 80s, was greeted by a white female at their church as, "Hey, young buck." Okay? And he went ballistic. Well, first of all, this man has his PhD from Harvard. So, he thinks he's, she had to tell me about how he thinks he's all that because he's from Harvard. But part of that, kind of goes back to that slavery type thinking. Somebody calls me a young buck, they're not respecting me, they're looking at my physical prowess and not what my intellectual prowess and what it is that I can do. When they say, were you treated with respect? Well, you go in a doctor's office and they say, "Melva, come on in." Some people are okay with that. Some people are like, and sometimes even when I'm out with friends, they'll go, "You don't know her like that. That's Dr. Thompson-Robinson." They want to make sure the title is there. And sometimes, in particular with older African Americans, because they've never been treated with that respect, they expect, Mrs. Jones, not "Hey, Sally, come on back." So in thinking about, like were you greeted appropriately, again, that understanding of what was expected and what was received becomes very important, because some people will expect to be greeted a certain way, and that's not what they receive. Understand that sometimes there's going to be discrepancies between a pencil paper survey and an interview. Okay, so pencil paper, people probably are going to be more likely to be honest, more likely to be brutal if they feel that that's an anonymous survey, versus an interview. Even if it's calling you on the phone, but an in-person interview, they're not going to say those same things, because now you've got potentially somebody who's looking across from you going, oh, she's a little baddie, or oh, she's, a diva and expects, all these things. I mean, there's going to be, you're now going to be looking and reading, kind of trying to read that person's face like, maybe I shouldn't say, or maybe this isn't appropriate. Sometimes you will get those people who will be like, I don't really care. I'm going to say my piece and I'm going to say it how it needs to be said. But, a lot of people are going to kind of back up a little bit and not do that. So, just know that if you do the pencil paper and you do interviews, you're not going to get the same results. And that's just because the anonymity goes away unless you have a third party person who's doing it. Okay? So if it's, because obviously, think about it. If you're calling me about a service I received, so if Southwest Airlines is calling me, clearly they know I've flown, they have my phone number, they know my name, all this information. And so, you don't want to say something, like the service sucked, Southwest Airlines is the Greyhound of the skies and blah, 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 for fear that, something now gets put in your record because they know who you are, and now, for whatever reason, every time you fly, you're always in C group. It doesn't matter when you check in, you're always in C group. I mean, so that's why people will do something different versus a pencil paper survey. People are going to be more likely to tell you what they're thinking. And this is even, it says pencil paper, but, even an online survey, something that's anonymous, where people aren't giving their personal data, will be a little bit different than when you're talking to them, kind of thing. When you do decide that you want to look at satisfaction, the thing is, capture their expectations and their experience. Okay? Don't just focus on, how they were treated and things like that, but focus in on what was the expectations and what was the experience. Okay, and really, you can say this for when you're making a complaint, like, don't focus in on, I didn't like, the way he looked at me and blah, 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 or anything like that. Focus in on the expectations and the experience. Mm-hmm.
So you said that you don't usually recommend the satisfaction part of evaluation.
Mm-hmm.
Or would be an appropriate situation where you would use the satisfaction?
If you've had an issue with reputation, I would probably start looking at some satisfaction surveys. But I would clearly document out expectations and experiences, okay? Because sometimes people are just dissatisfied because of their expectations are way higher than whatever service provisions we could provide. You know, it's like tuition and stuff here. It's like, you know, sometimes it's not until I say, don't get it twisted, the university is a business and they're about making money and making sure they get their money, that's when people go, oh, I hadn't thought about it like that, you know. Like they see tuition going up all the time and they're like, well, why is it going up all the time? They should take pity on me because I'm a student and I don't have any money and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, child, these people want their money, okay? Let's just be clear. They want, you know, and so it's like once you have that different expectation, then you can kind of more align with, you know, your experience appropriately. So, but if you know, like if you're hearing like reputation-wise that your organization or your program doesn't have a good reputation, you might want to start looking at satisfaction around expectations and experience, how people are treated, what is it that they're expecting, you know. Maybe there's something you can do so that the experience that they have aligns better with their expectations. Okay? Sometimes you can't make those changes, you know. So you know, maybe people want like an incentive or something, you know, and you don't have the money, or your grant won't allow you to give incentives. Let's just say, you know, so people have this expectation. Their expectation is that they're getting an incentive. Their experience is that they're not, so they're not satisfied. So, you know, and now it's like, oh, well, that's that cheap program. They don't give us anything for our time, blah, 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 blah. Becomes, you know, what the reputation is in the community. Once you learn that, then you can go back and say, look, here's why we can't. We know you expect certain things, but here's why we can't. So, and then again, I think part of what we have been talking about is that the scope of satisfaction can be difficult to define. So it's kind of hard. And that's why I say, you know, go back to expectations and experience. I wouldn't even go back to how people were treated. I would stick to expectations and experience. So part of it becomes, you know, you end up with items related to the organizational or service utilization plans, what your plans are, what the grant says you can and cannot do, what the rules are of your agency. You know, there might be some things you just cannot do, you know, that people want. And so you've got to, you know, so as you're talking about satisfaction, think about there's some things you just cannot do. You know, I mean, like, I have to give people a grade in a class, and I have to give you feedback, and, you know, so, you know, the expectation might be, for a student might be, oh, I'm going to get an A. Your experience might be that I didn't get an A, and so now I'm not satisfied. Well, you know, then how do we say, you know, somebody says, well, I'm not satisfied with that class. May not necessarily be true. What you really might need to not be satisfied with is your effort in the class, for example. You know what I mean? So when you're looking at some things, you know, you've got to kind of take those things into perspective. So does that kind of all that makes sense about satisfaction? Like you kind of understand, like when, you know, if somebody says, ooh, let's look at how satisfied people were with our class, or how satisfied people were with blah, 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 blah. You usually kind of go, I don't think so. Let's think about it from, you know, an expectations and an experience kind of thing. Because sometimes you can just improve satisfaction by educating people about what they should expect. You know, because maybe their expectations, you know, are off the charts. So just, you know, if somebody says, let's look at satisfaction, think about it in those lines. So, program logistics. So, when we're talking about implementation of your intervention, there's going to be things around program logistics that you're going to want to think about. So one of which is going to be workflow. So, you know, you talk about program logistics. This is the behind the scenes stuff. It's not just, oh, we're going to implement an intervention. I'm going to go out tomorrow and I'm going to implement this intervention. There's a whole bunch of other things that have to happen for that to go right. So part of the queuing is, how do you order those things? How do you put them in a way that it happens, you know? So do you have, you know, and part of this might be a logic model or a flow chart, you know, so you, for example, you're going to implement an intervention, you have to identify a site, okay? Well, that should probably occur first, and then, but then you need to recruit participants, okay? But at the same time that you're recruiting participants to be at the site for the intervention, you also need to make sure that you've got staff and that staff are trained and that you've got materials and so on and so forth. So you might have things that are occurring at the same time, and it's not just a linear model or a circular model, but it might be that there's, you know, think about like an organizational chart or a flow chart. You know, there might be several different things that are going on simultaneously. So if you're now talking about, okay, well, let's look at program logistics, understand that how things are queued, how things are ordered up, how do the tasks get done, who's involved in all of that. So the amount of work that's done by staff, okay? Sometimes things may be portioned off so that somebody does the recruitment of the site, somebody else does the recruitment of the participants, somebody else make sure that, you know, the people that are trained to implement the intervention have everything that they need, so on and so forth. So it's kind of like, how do you divide up the work and make sure that the things are happening? You also then want to involve your staff in those measures, okay? Especially if you're not out in the field every day doing stuff, you know, and you're supervising, even if it's community health workers. How do things flow? How do things get done? Okay? So how do you go about identifying a person to intervene with? And then from there, what happens in terms of next steps and referrals and so on and so forth? Because documenting out this workflow will also help you in documenting out your process monitoring measures and your process evaluation measures. Because then you'll be able to see, here's where things might be breaking down, and here's what we need to be looking at. Another thing around program logistics is going to be your materials produced. Okay? So, understand that the data on your materials can be challenging, okay? Especially if multiple people are going to the copier and making copies and things like that. Especially if multiple people are ordering materials or securing, like the snacks for a location. All that information becomes hard to keep track of, okay? So on some level, you've got to kind of figure out, okay, what's really important here around the materials, and then how are we looking at it? So sometimes it's going to be program specific. So, what you might do for one intervention, you're not going to do for another intervention, so on and so forth. Think about it realistically. So, for example, we used to get sandwich platters for kids when we had intervention sessions. And so they would, we'd have a sandwich platter. We kept track of how many platters we got. We didn't keep track of how many sandwiches necessarily people ate. Okay? So think, kind of what's the important piece here? Like, do we really need to know how many sandwiches people ate? Or do we just need to know how many platters we ordered? And then you can kind of adjust based on, like we ordered 2 platters. We thought we were going to have 15 kids. We're seeing now that we're really only going to have 7 kids, so we can cut back on a platter. Okay? But realize, honestly, you're not going to count how many handouts you're giving out, okay, per session. You might say, here's how many kids were here, and here's how many, we gave everybody one handout, but you're not necessarily going to keep track of here's how many copies we made, here's how many we gave out, here's how many we got back. That's just a little too anal and a little too ridiculous. And if somebody wants you to do that, they probably are more about the power than they know what they're doing. So, just be aware that you're not going to be able to keep track of everything, especially if you've got, like multiple sites going on where you're implementing interventions. So people are taking stuff, they're bringing stuff back, you're restocking. It's a constant moving target in terms of what's actually being used and things like that. You can generate, yes, we bought, these brochures, yes, we made these copies, but in terms of trying to keep track of how many you actually use, and let's be honest, sometimes we have handouts, we give them out, and, maybe somebody leaves it, and so then we pick it up trying to clean up the room, okay? Did we really give that handout out because we got it back, or kind of what happened here, So that's where kind of, keeping track of some of the materials sometimes can be kind of splitting hairs, and so you need to think differently about it. Okay, so we're about to make a huge switch, but before we do, I want to check in, like, are you okay? Are you kind of feeling a little overwhelmed? Like, Dr. Tiara, this might be enough for right now. Everybody's okay? All right, so we're gonna go a little bit more. I probably want to end probably in about 25-30 minutes. So what we're going to be talking about is moving from your logic models that you came up with, or moving basically from your objectives now into evaluable outcomes, so things that you can evaluate. Okay, so you wrote these objectives in program planning. Now you got to figure out, what are we really evaluating here? So I'm gonna give you time to write this down. So if you guys wanna copy this table down, I'll give you plenty of time to do that. Does everybody have this down? Okay, so, just like the precede, proceed logic model, you saw all HED 720, you're gonna see this table all semester, okay? So when we do group activities and I, give you something to work through, this is basically what you're going to be doing, okay? Some key things about this table is these, some people, you know, depending upon what you put in your logic model, you may not, if you put your objective in your logic model, then there's no need to go back and make this up, okay? Sometimes some people find it easier to put like, to flip like the evaluation question in the SMART objective, so that it goes logic model outcome, so they say, okay, here's what we had in our logic model, here's the objective that we came up for that, what was in the logic model, and then here's the here's the evaluation question. Okay? So, so let me just, so some of this right here, hold on, let me just check my notes for a minute, because I think, alright, so the rest of what I have is, is about indicator and source of evidence, okay? So, logic model outcome, you probably have in your logic model, unless of course you put an objective, in which case then use the objective, and don't worry about this. The evaluation question is going to be a question that you ask that will let you know whether or not you met the objective. So if the objective is by December 1, 2010, 300 undergraduate students from UNLV will be recruited to participate in nutrition classes that will be offered on campus during the spring 2011 semester. So the evaluation question is how many students, UNLV students, were recruited to attend the nutrition classes. Okay? So see how if you answer this question, it'll let you know whether or not you met your objective. Okay? Notice here, because we say that 300 undergraduate students will be recruited, we're not focused here on how they were recruited. We're only talking about how many were recruited because we said 300 were going to be recruited. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. So, let's move this chair back. So then the next step is talking about indicators. And so this dashboard is here because think about your cars, okay? Everybody's got little gauges or lights that come on or off as an indicator of their performance of their car. Okay, so you know your car is running well or not running well based on where the gauges read, how the gauges read, or whether or not there's a light on. Okay, I can tell you my truck is probably not running well because there's a light on and it's been on for a good month. Okay, so indicator is this. So your indicator is going to be information or a statistic that's going to provide evidence of progress towards an outcome. Okay, so if your outcome is that your car is running fine, and the indicator that it's not is, you know, the check engine light coming on, or some other message or messages coming across the screen. So it gives insight into the performance of the program. So it kind of tells you how are you doing in terms of meeting your objectives. Okay, so an example. So if student engagement in graduate classes, how do we know students are engaged? Okay, well, we could say the percent of students who arrived on time for class. We could look at the number of heads that are down during classes. We could look at the number of students who are asking questions, or the percent of students who are asking questions. We could look at the percent of people who are taking notes. There's a lot of different things that'll tell us the student engagement in graduate classes. So the indicator becomes, what is it that you're going to look at to know that you're meeting your objective? Okay. And notice it's one concept, but you could look at it a variety of different ways. Okay. I even said, looking at students taking notes. Okay. We could even say something about percent of students who leave early, or the percent of students who come to class or don't come to class. I mean, there's a lot of different things. Some of it may be you want to measure all of these things, or you may only have the resource to measure one or two things. Okay? So that's part of what it is there's a variety of ways. So now you've got to think, okay, well, if these are the ones that we came up with, which one is best in looking at engagement? Okay, and on-time arrival doesn't necessarily mean anything, especially in this town when people are working and they're dealing with traffic to get to campus, but maybe number of heads down during class could mean something. People are sleeping, so you're not entertaining them and keeping them awake, but also the percent of students who are asking questions, okay? So people that are engaged are going to ask questions because they're paying attention, they're thinking about it, and now they're saying, hey, wait a minute, that didn't quite make sense. Okay? So you could look at these. Okay? So there's multiple ways of looking at things. Part of what that means is when you guys do your evaluation plans, some of you work together in groups. Okay? You're going to write evaluation plans, and you may look at things from different perspectives and figuring out what it is that you're going to evaluate. That doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means that there's multiple indicators out there for how are you going to measure that. What are you going to look at? Okay? So when I would say, when you were writing your objectives, and I'd say, is this measurable? Part of what I'm saying is, how are you going to know? What's going to be the indicator that you're going to look at to know whether or not that happened? I mean, we could do, like with this class. How do we know TR had class? Well, she's got PowerPoint. Now she's got video. But you all have got notes. Okay? If I did a sign-in sheet, we would say, these are the people who signed in, they're in class. All of the, I could do, although it wouldn't necessarily work for this class because it's so small, but I could do a sign-in sheet at the beginning of class and then one at the end, so I make sure I capture everybody, for those that are coming in late and then those that leave early. I mean, it's like multiple different ways, but which one makes sense? I might say, well, looking at the students' notes makes sense, because then most of you guys probably put a date on there of here's when it was. You put a title, here's what the topic of the lecture was, and then you've got something either written or typed up, and we go from there. So, but now is that realistic? Is that realistic if, the chair's coming to me and saying, hey, how do I know you had class? I can't say, well, I could say, go to Amanda and get her notes. But that's only because Amanda is, faculty in residence in the school. If she wasn't in this class, it wouldn't be realistic for me to say, go see Joanna, or go see Prescott or Alex or whatever. That's not realistic. But what I can show you for sure is, here's the PowerPoint, and I can say, we got up to this point and we'll pick up the rest next week, kind of thing. Now, because I'm recording, I can say, see, I got a video that shows this is when I did. It doesn't look, well, it might time and date stamp the video, but if it timed and date stamped, then that would obviously be even additional documentation, because I could say, oh no, see, my class meets at this time, and see, here's when the video started. It started at 4:02, and it ran for 2.5 hours. You can't argue that, and then you could fast forward through the video and see, the slides being rotated, me moving back and forth. You would know that that's what's being done. So just don't feel bad if you don't always choose the same indicators that other people choose, because there's going to be multiple ways of looking at things. Okay. Indicators can be thought of in terms of baseline indicators. Or you could think of indicators in terms of target indicators. So baseline in terms of what's the value prior to the start of the program. Target indicator being what's the expected value at a set point in time. Okay, so to go back to this table here, most times this indicator is going to be your target indicator. Okay, very rarely do you have a baseline indicator. Okay, however, if you're talking about improving from pre to post in a situation, then you do have that baseline indicator, and then you have that target indicator. Okay, so which is this, baseline or target?
Target.
Did you point to the indicator?
The indicator. Target or baseline? Prescott said target. Anybody want to go baseline? Right, target indicator, because that's where your expected value, that's where you're trying to get to. Okay. I'm actually gonna stop right here, because if I could go on, but it gets a little deeper. Any questions about this so far? We'll finish up next week talking about indicators and how you move from outcomes to indicators. We will talk some about what makes a credible indicator. And then we'll talk too about sources of evidence. So what's going to be your source of evidence? So if you're saying, okay, this is what we need to know in order to know whether or not we met our objective, where are you going to get that data from? Okay, and so that's what we'll talk about here. And what I'll encourage you here is to be creative. In other words, don't just do a damn survey. I mean, that's the easy thing to do, but, you know, think creatively about how can we, you know, how do we go about knowing how to do things, okay? We will also do some practice runs, so I'll bring blank versions of these, and with some, you know, objectives, and then, you know, you guys can work through them. Not necessarily with the logic model outcome, but with the evaluation question. I'll give you the objective and then you can fill in the rest. Okay? So you can learn some of the first step of evaluation. Okay? Think about this. Make sure it makes sense. Understand the whole implementation piece. Okay, we haven't talked about whether or not anything changed yet. We've only talked about implementing the program. Okay, so don't jump ahead yet. Questions, comments? Okay, I will see you all next week.
Actually, next Tuesday. I'm gonna be in Chicago.